All right. Need to keep Philip and Lucretia in our prayers. She's out of surgery, and obviously, I think you probably got the email, and they're going to keep her overnight, and then, Lord willing, should be able to get her home tomorrow. See how that rolls, but yeah, so get that figured out. But glad that the surgery went well. That's for sure. Yeah, yeah, keeping her overnight for that. So that's a good thing for sure. Other prayer requests? Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely need. Yeah, right. Right, sure. Hmm. She is. She is. Yeah, yeah. That's what she said to the other one. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Karen's sister-in-law. Karen's sister-in-law. She was asking for prayer about the family. Your wife, Karen. You looked at me. You looked at me like. I was starting to wonder if I need to do sign language? Do I need to? And where was she at? Where, I mean, Garland, Rockwell area. Hmm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, right, Roger, would you mind leading us tonight? Yeah. All right. Deuteronomy. Chapter 20. Chapter 20 is going to deal with Israel's covenant in relation to battle and warfare. A part of the covenant in inheriting the promised land was to a test of that covenant was to fight the inhabitants and to overtake those people in order to possess that land. So, what you find in Joshua is a foretaste of that, and Joshua leads them into battle to take the central locations. You know, in battle strategy, you're going to cut out your main lines of communication, main lines of supply for demand, and so you find that same thing in relation to the cities that Joshua took. But then following that, there were the Bible tells us that there were a people unyet conquered. Joshua says that was in order to test the people whether or not they were going to fully follow God. It's a lot of what's going on with Caleb in terms of, you remember Caleb at the end of his life, give us a land. And I'm still as vigorous as I was then. He's not speaking necessarily of his physical ability, but of his spirit, and literally his spirit to accomplish the commands of God in relation to the covenant of God. So inhabiting that land was a part of the covenant of God. In the Old Testament, if you want to, you look for commonalities, but then there are some distinguishing marks between the Old Testament and the New Testament. One of the distinguishing marks between the Old Testament and the New Testament is in the Old Testament was very much a come and see God. So it was come to us. So in conquering Israel, and specifically having Jerusalem as your hub city, all roads lead through Jerusalem. So when you have traveling and things that are going on, that's your central route. It'd be like an airlines whose hub is Atlanta, and so most of your flights go through Atlanta to get to wherever you want to go. Well, when you're then in Atlanta, if you have a layover, let's say you have a layover for 2 weeks, which is not what we're used to, but say you have a layover for 2 weeks. to restock, resupply, to finish your journey. You are influenced by that culture during that time, what's going on in relation to this culture. So it's very much a come and see. Now, in the New Testament, that changes. So the New Testament, you don't have a central hub. It is a go and say. So the mark, and I think that the church in America has struggled with this. Probably Europe as well. I haven't studied that as much, but probably the church in America has struggled with this a lot because we have still, in a lot of ways, operated under a come and see mentality, when the reality is it's really a go and tell mentality. One of the pushes that we want with Cornerstone is to, what we would say is bloom in the place where you're planted. In other words, go and be disciples. Go and evangelize. Where? Where you're at. You know, in some ways we can add to, in wrong ways, the Word of God. It's not bad in relation to, necessarily setting up evangelism and even nights of evangelism and those kinds of things. But our culture was open to that, right? Knock on the door, ring the doorbell, go and talk to somebody, and there's generally going to be somebody home, Now, not so much. And then if you do, why are you soliciting on my door? Kind of a thing. And then you're trying to make the connection of relevance between them and you, and you're trying to make that jump from physical to spiritual in a 5-minute conversation. And again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad, but what I would say is, what's a better model? And what I would say is a better model is everyone in the church being salt and light in the place in which they live. Now, how relevant are you? You're as relevant as the people that are in the congregation. So you say, well, how useful can we be? Well, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8. We got 9 people in this room. I don't know how many in there. Let's say we've got 9 in here, and let's just say we've got 6 in there. You got 15 people. Well, how relevant can 15 people be? How relevant can 15 people be? Well, if you've got a teacher, now you've got someone in the school system. If you've got a nurse, you've got somebody in the hospital. If you've got a mechanic, you've got somebody who, when your car gets broke, is around them. You've got landscaping covered, right? You still have probably interaction with the radio business that's covered. You've got another school system in Prairie Land that's covered, right? You've got all over the place. Mom says not doing nothing. I don't know if she's talking about herself or Dad, but you've got that covered. Well, wait a minute. You look up, and with 15 people, you've got 12 different occupations covered. That's on a Wednesday night. I mean, you see what we're saying? If all understand that we're being salt and light in the place where God's planted us, you're now as diverse and unique as all of the personalities and the occupations that God has placed those people in. So in what we see today, there is a distinction in the way in which the gospel is being presented and shared. So in the Old Testament, you have very much a come and see. You conquer the lands, and there's warfare in order for you to be able to come and see. But there are principles and values that transcend both, right? In other words, even between a come and see time and a go and tell time, there's principles and values that should be found in both, okay? Today, specifically, we're talking about warfare. So when you go out, right? Now, so accomplishing the covenant commands that God has given, think of it in those terms. Chapter 20, verse 1. When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them. For the Lord your God, who brought you up from the land of Egypt, is with you. Now, why would he say that? What? Go ahead, Roger. Yeah. So the temptation is to go and look out at numbers and say, well, they outnumber us, and therefore the battle is won or lost based upon those numbers, right? Well, is that the right way to evaluate this particular battle? Now, this is interesting because in the New Testament, he talks about in being prepared. One of the illustrations he gives is when you go out to battle, number your army and weigh out your enemy, right? Because if you cannot win that battle, then what should you do? In the New Testament, what did it say that you should do? You remember? Go and make peace. Go and make peace, because you don't want to go against the battle that you can't win, right? You can't. You want to go out and have a battle against a guy that's got 3 times the army of you, and you didn't properly prepare in the sense of weighing out their number versus yours, right? So this is not an issue in relation to being prepared. But why would he say here, when they outnumber you, don't fear that? Why would he say that? Okay, which is? Okay, and specifically, how did they know that the Lord their God was with them? Okay. Okay. Well, they haven't conquered Canaan yet, but this is foreshadowing that, right? Okay. So when they came out of Egypt, what went on that was going to establish them that they should act and respond this way? Yeah. So one, you have a past situation that went in where the greatest army in the world God was able to overcome. But what's the fear that can still creep in, even if you've gone through that and you know that God took care of you then? What can still be the fear that creeps in when you go now into the promised land and you see a great army? What can be the fear? Is He still with us? And how do you answer that question? Okay, you have to remember what He's done, but now here's the fear that we have is He did it then, but what's always comes in? How do I know He's going to show up now? And how do you answer that question? Okay, and we're saying that faith is not just if I say it long enough, hard enough, it's going to come true. Our faith has substance. What does faith have substance? How does our faith have substance? How does faith in general have substance? Sometimes it doesn't and it shouldn't. But when it does and it should, what's the substance of good faith? Okay, believing what? Okay, that's key right there. Believing that God will do, but do what? What He said He would do. Because here's oftentimes where we miss it in relation to our battles of faith. A lot of times the reason we don't have confidence in the battles that we're going into is because we don't know if the battles that we're going into are our battles or if they're the Lord's battles. Why don't we have that? Because we're questioning or don't know sometimes the purpose of God and the purpose of us and what we're doing, and is that aligned? But when you know that, and now you're going into battle in relation to that, why should you not have fear? The answer to that is because you trust that what God has promised He has said that He would do. See, this is where we have gotten into a bad habit of asking God to bless our plans. And then in asking God to bless our plans, we then start moving forward and we say, well, if we just have faith that God's going to show up and do what He did because He did it in the past, but we really don't know if He'll show up. And why don't we really know if He's going to show up? Because we don't really know if these are really God's plans. Now, if you're moving forward in relation to God's plans, let me give you an example. if you're moving forward, that I'm living my life to the glory of God. If you come in and you say, God, I want this day to be for your glory. In other words, to display your value, your greatness, your worth. And I want my life to display that. Now you're walking into the battles that you're going to go through that day. How can you have confidence in relation to the battles for that day? Number one is because is God for that? His glory. Absolutely 100%. You don't have to wonder if He is. You don't have to question whether or not He is. You don't have to doubt whether or not He is. Now, in relation to that, has God given you any promises for you to have confidence as you're walking through that in the battles that lay ahead? And the answer to that is what? Yes, He has. So now if you know the purpose and the plan of God, and you know the promises that God has given that accompany that purpose and plan, you should walk what? In strength. No matter what you see that is coming at you. Right? See, that's there are two different things that is being spoken about in terms of subject matter when He's saying in the New Testament, if you see an army ahead that's greater and mightier than you, you should weigh it out. Why should you weigh it out? Why? Preparedness, right? Because there are people who weren't acting not uprightly. They weren't being prepared in what they did. They didn't count the cost, right? They didn't count the cost. And here you see what? I've already given you purpose and plan. We're going to go take a nation, and you're going to be a come and see people. And you're going to have to go out and you're going to battle against these people. But when you go and you see the might of those people, don't fear their might. Why don't you fear their might? Because you know the purpose and plan of God, and you have already experienced the provision of God against an army much mightier and greater than probably anything that you'll ever see in the coming days, right? And oh, by the way, who's going to be with you? The presence of God will be with you, right? Why do we not have to fear? Most of the time, I find that there's a great fear in talking about God with other people. Why do we not have to fear that? It is His plan, being salt and light. So now we are resting in the provision that He gives us to work out His plan. So we don't need to fear that. We don't need to fear that. So you're seeing that here in a different way. Then verse 2, when you're approaching the battle, the priest shall come near and speak to the people. He shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, you are approaching the battle against your enemies today. Do not be faint-hearted, do not be afraid or panic or tremble before them. Now, if he's saying this, is this a possibility? Yeah, absolutely, right? Why? Because the Lord your God is one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. Okay, so that's the bottom line based truth, the reality of the matter. Okay, but now see how he fleshes this out and how that then is carried out. The officers also shall speak to the people, saying, Who is the man that has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him depart and return to his house, otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would dedicate it. Okay, what is that? That's a big question mark, right? So you're exempt if you're built a house, but you completed, but it's not to the point of you being able to live in it. Okay? That's a weird thing to say. You're exempt, you know. You got an eye out. Well, you can't fight because you can't see, right? In the military, I've never heard our military say, "Have you built a house recently?" Have you recently built a house? Yes. Have you been able to live in it yet? Dedicate it to the Lord. Well, no, we'll go home, right? But that's what he says. Seems like a weird thing, right? Who is the man that's planted a vineyard and has not begun to use its fruit? Let him depart and return to his house, otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man begin to use its fruit. So you plant a garden, you sowed its seed, but you have not yet been able to yield from that a crop. Okay, we'll go home. Verse 7. Who is the man who's engaged to a woman and has not yet married her? Let him depart and return to his house, otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would marry her. So why have those laws in place? Why have those provisions in place? Provisions, what do you mean? Okay. What would be the hesitation of having those people there? Yeah. So how's Karen doing with her sister-in-law? To which Dennis says, "Huh?" And his answer was, "I didn't plan it." Dennis and I didn't plan this out. Okay. And his answer was, "My mind is back in the field. It's back in the pasture." Which means what? I'm not, at that time, fully here. My heart is where? My heart is somewhere else, right? Not to give Dennis a hard time. Dennis, you can leave, Dennis. Just go to your pasture, Dennis. But notice what's happening. I'm invested in the place, right, in the land, but I haven't experienced the blessings of the land. And when I haven't experienced the blessings of the land, this is interesting. When I have not experienced the blessings of the land, I'm not prepared to fight for the land. When I haven't truly experienced the blessings of the land, I'm not prepared to fight for the land. They're not detached. No, it's no. If that question makes you feel like those two things are detached. The blessings and provision of God and the fighting for God are never detached. That's what I'm saying on Sundays. That's what I'm saying on Sundays.
But you're putting more value on the land, the house, the wife, whatever.
Because it doesn't terminate on that. I understand where you're going with that. It's not an idol because it doesn't terminate on that. Well, when it terminates on that, when you're fighting for that, then it terminates on that and it becomes an idol because it's dead. So in other words, to say, well, the only reason I'm fighting is because I got the provisions and now I want to fight for the provisions and that's why I'm in battle. That's an idol because that's where it ends. It's dead. It ends on you. But when you've experienced the blessing of God, it doesn't end on you. What does it go back to? It goes back to God. So it's a provision in which you're giving back to God in rejoicing, joyful thankfulness. So now when I'm fighting, I am not fighting in a self-driven mode, but I'm fighting out of the thankfulness of the provision of what God has given. God does this all the time. He almost apart from any human effort does a work to the blessing of His people. And then He calls His people into that work. But they've had to experience that blessing in order to be able to do the work. And if they don't experience the blessing and aren't showing gratitude in relation to that blessing, they're not ready to do the work. So when you see giving in the New Testament, you always see it, you're always seeing it not out of obligation, and you're not seeing it in order for the purpose of you getting more. You're seeing it with an attitude of rejoicing and thanksgiving. Why is that? It's not terminating on that thing. It's reciprocating because it's truly being it truly is what God meant for it to be. That's why when we talk about heaven and reward in heaven, it's not it seems like a very selfish thing to think about it. Part of it's because I've had to over influence it because we don't think that we can talk about reward. Because we think that it's wrong and it's selfish. And it would be if it terminated on that. But when God gives it to us to the point of it blowing us out of the water, it always actually is never fully ended until it comes out with a praise and worship to God. That's the reason the only way that I can really explain it is when you talk about your greatest vacation. And the reason I keep coming back to that is because when you go to a place, let's say you go to California and you see the redwoods. How many of y'all been to California and saw the redwoods? Yeah. And you go there and you see the redwoods, and what do? You just stop and take it in. I mean, there's so much greater and massive, and you just say, almost to the point of where have I been in my entire life? You don't go into it selfishly hoarding it. You understand what I'm saying? And it's not complete. It's interesting because it's never complete because until you come home and you're able to tell somebody else about it. But even then when you share that, it seems inadequate, and what do you say? You really need to go. You really need to go and see it for yourself. So there has to be a savoring and understanding of the goodness of God in order to be able to go to battle on behalf of God, if you will. It's an ironic statement because it's not like God needs our help anyway. But we are not separated from His work. We're not separated from His work. So what happens? You have to taste the provision and the blessing of God in order to move out and go into battle for God. Thoughts? What is the natural tendency of man? And America is a great example of this. When you receive blessing, what's the natural tendency? Is the natural tendency gratitude? And the more that you get, most of the time what happens? The more entitled you are rather than the more grateful you feel. So let's this is not here probably, but whoever's listening, it could get upsetting. What's going on in America? There's an incredible sense of entitlement to a people who have done nothing and have been given everything and are ungrateful for it because they feel entitled to it. Now, before we get too high on our horse, we have been a people who have generally, those blessings have pretty much for us become idols because we rather have the idol than the creator of the idol. Because why? What are we actually afraid of right now? We're afraid that our toys are going to be taken from us. Most of the pushback is not, I don't think, and this may be controversial even here, I don't think most of the pushback is we're afraid that Christianity is going to be taken away. Most of us are afraid that our toys are going to be taken from us. Well, how do you know if a kid is there for a relationship with his father or his toy? What do you need to do? Take the toy away and see how he acts. And we pretty much acted like what? Little brats. We pretty much acted like brats. You have a testing and a trial, because what happens now, this is prior to the battle. What do you not want when you're in battle? You don't want somebody thinking about home, and you don't want them going where? You don't want them to go AWOL, right? You don't want deserters. Because what will testing do? It'll take the wheat and the tares. So what are they trying to do prior to that? They're seeking to weed some of this stuff out to begin with. So the people who are going into the battle do not have an excuse. You have tasted the provisions of God. You've tasted the goodness of God. You have a wife to whom you've been married to, whom you've been able to be with. You've been able to build a house and dedicate it, and invite your friends over. You've been able to you've been able to plant in your fields and reap its harvest. So you should be what? You should be all in. You should be all in. And must be. Yep, and must be. So it seems almost like, man, that's really weird. But there's the sense in which you are fighting for the blessing, and I don't think that's anti-New Testament. See, that's what I keep saying, and I know I keep saying it to you guys, but I think it's because it's a problem in the church. If God has said, "Do this and you will be rewarded," how can we, when we say, "Well, no, that's not right," you and I then are adding to Scripture. We're saying that we know more than what God has said. Now, I understand that we can say, yeah, but you're not supposed to work for the reward. But God has given us that reward as a motivator to work. So you can't say that the two are totally severed. I agree in the sense that you're not working for the reward to be an end for me, but a reward that's being given, a father who gives his son and we can test this. I mean, if my dad wants to do this test with me, we can test this. If a father wants to give a vacation to his son to the redwoods, right? We can test that. You know, says, I need you to mow my yard for 3 times before you do it, because the work is always less than the worth of the reward. You understand that, right? So he's not asking me to do this for 4 or 5 years, right? And then say, go to the redwoods. The work is always less than the reward. But he sets that out there as, I want to reward you, right? And when you do, we don't get a sense from there that I earned that reward. You don't get that sense whenever we're doing that with God. Why? Because now He is giving us the provisions and the means to even be able to work in relation to that reward. But you're seeing that principle in the Old Testament, even in relation to that covenant. So when we're bringing that in the New Testament, as it relates for us to heaven, it's not a new concept. The values and the principles of that are grounded even in the Old Testament in relation to that. Okay. Yes. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah.
But that's not really, that's not the way most people feel.
And that's the
feel that they've done that 3 times more in the current.
yes.
That's
Yes. And that's part of too why it's been kind of not a rough journey, but it's a jagged journey, that we have to get a right view of heaven and that reward. Otherwise we're not aligned with Paul. Paul says if the resurrection doesn't happen, I'm to be pitied for the life that I've lived on this earth. So Paul is saying, what I've given up on this earth, if that doesn't happen, I've wasted all that work that I've done on his place. Literally then on this place. So Paul's making connections there that we still are far from. Yeah, because you're right. That's why our understanding and view of what heaven is actually going to be like, it's got to be great. We generally, I think that we're going to be bored in heaven. We are not going to be bored in heaven. I think we're going to be productive and active and exactly the way that God wired us, an environment perfectly fitted for us in relation to that work. And we're gonna enjoy it. We're gonna absolutely enjoy it. So, but you're seeing that even here. Is there a covenant relationship with Him in relation to what you're doing on this earth as it relates to that covenant? Okay, because most of the time this is just passed over. So it's just some Old Testament stuff that whatever. I have no clue. That's weird. And move on. So, verse 8, the officer shall speak further to the people and say, who is the man that is afraid and faint-hearted? Let him depart and return to his house, so that he might not make his brother's hearts melt like his heart. See, what happens whenever you get that seed planted in that group of people? This is why even within us, there's not just a presence in terms of, well, they're here. No, what's the attitude that accompanies the presence? That's a big deal. What's the number one indictment in relation to churches by outsiders and or even people within the church? They ain't no different than we are. And oh, by the way, you've got that that's always and we always gripe about the carpet and the paint color. Big standing joke. Always griping about the carpet and the paint colors. Well, what are they talking about there? They're talking about attitude. They're talking about an attitude. And do those attitudes influence the group as a whole? Yeah, we talk about businesses all the time. Morale. Does everybody get along, or are they always this nit-knacking back and forth all the time? Right? Well, who wants to be in that environment? Ironically, you'll do it at work. Why? Because you want to get paid. But in a community of faith, generally we won't do it. Why do we not do that? I think it's because you didn't understand how God's economy works in relation to what you're here for and how God's rewarding that in the sense of getting paid. But see, it's a big deal. You've got to taste the provision of God. You've got to taste the provision of God. Otherwise, you'll influence others in the wrong way. Verse 9, when the officers have finished speaking to the people, they shall appoint commanders of armies at the head of the people. So now we know, right? Now we know, and now we're able to appoint. It's interesting that comes at the end too, because I think it might signal that until you search these matters out, you don't know who's fit to be at command. I think it's a weeding out process, but in a different way. That's a good point to bring out with Gideon. With Gideon, they were weeding out, but why specifically were they weeding out? Do you remember why he said? Because otherwise they would what? They would think that it was them who won the battle. Yeah. So I think it is a weeding out. I think that's the same, but I think the purpose for which is different. In that particular case, if they went with the numbers they had when they won, they would say, it's us that did it and our numbers. So God, in that case, that's an interesting thing, makes the numbers so overwhelmingly against them that they can't take credit for the battle. Yeah. See that, so that point correlates with what's going on with Gideon. There's the heart of man. The heart of man is we see a group of people, well, we can beat them people. Who needs God? Interestingly, that was after a what? After a victory. Right? What happens when David does this whenever he's going to go and fight against Saul and he goes with Philistine lords? What happens back home? He loses everything. But what does David do when he gets back home and sees all that and they're ready to kill him? But what does he do? Yeah, he doesn't take off. Yeah, he doesn't take off. Yeah. So verse 10, when you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it agrees to make peace with you and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall become your forced labor and shall serve you. It seems like there's a provision, this is a little bit of a side note, but it seems like there's a provision that when Joshua went in and those cities that he took, he wanted them totally wiped out. And God initially makes it's like in the early stages of a work that God is doing, he makes his points very strong. Very, very strong. Pentecost, Ananias and Sapphira do what? Lie. Well, what does that deserve? Yeah, but don't say that because otherwise we all should be. But we're not. Why not? See, that was a new work God was doing. And he wants to make a point. There is the point in which we all are deserving death. But at that point, you take that for granted. And what does that seed bed, what does that start at the very beginning? If it starts at the very beginning. See, why do you want to get your kids under control early? It's the same principle. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to make a strong statement? Don't you cross me. Don't you cross me. You know, working with youth, I was telling actually Sherry and Betty this afternoon. She was talking about some of her school stuff. And I said, in youth ministry, every 5 years, 5 to 6 years, you've got to make a statement. And you're good for 5 or 6 years because word travels. And they're all scared, you know. So, for me, it was, leaving a kid on the parking lot because he was late. Well, guess what? Everybody else showed up on time from then on, because they knew with 75 kids, you can't sit there and wait for every kid that's late. It's different for us a little bit, but anyway, why do you want to do that? Because hey, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So God makes these statements a lot of times early, and he makes it hard. But then it seems that as they start spreading, then what does he give them the availability to do? Well, offer peace. Yeah, offer peace. So it's like there's this annihilation and clear it all out. Why? Because I am God, you are not. Right? And this is what's happening in relation to the covenant of God. But if that carries on too far, let's take the kid analogy. You get a kid young, he crosses you, and you straighten that out, and you straighten it out hard. And he says, whoa, I don't want to do that again. But then little Johnny just says a little wrong thing, and you come hard again, and you come hard again, and you come hard again. What happens? The character and nature now of dad is, it's not right. It's messed up. It's perverted. You see what we're saying? So it seems as though we're making that statement early, but now as we spread out, what are we doing? We're offering terms of peace. We're offering terms of peace, right? But if they say no, then what? Am I still God? Yes, I am. Yeah. So it's interesting to me because it seems like there's a display of the character and nature of God and how this is, moving forward as well, and how he operates with it. So, however, verse 12, if it does not make peace with you but makes war, then you shall besiege it when the Lord your God gives it into your hand. See, it's never an issue as to whether or not they could overtake it. So then the Lord gives it into your hand. You shall strike all of the men in it with the edge of the sword. Only the women, the children, the animals, and all that is in the city, and all of its spoil, you shall take as booty for yourself. You shall use the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all of the cities that are very far from you, which are not the cities of the nations nearby. Only the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave anything alive that breathes, but you shall utterly destroy the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, Jebusite, which the Lord your God has commanded you. So you're inhabiting here. What do you do to those nations that are right next to you? What do you do to them? Not those that are extended out. What do you do to them? What did you say? You annihilate them. Why do you annihilate the other peoples that are right next to you? And he tells you in the next verse. So that they may not teach you to do according to all of their detestable things which they have done for their gods, so that you would sin against the Lord your God. So does proximity matter? It doesn't matter who my friends are. I am just being a missionary to them. Okay?
But what surprises me is that the women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they could turn their heart on the men.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. A couple of things here. Genocide, the total annihilation of all peoples, should be hard for any of us to think about and bear. And the reason for that is because of the women and children generally. We generally don't have a problem with the men. And the reason for that is we feel like the men can protect themselves, the women and children cannot. So, number one, genocide for us should bother us when we see that. Why is God having total genocide to a group of people? And we have to take a step back and say, when God came in there, one of the things that he said early on in Deuteronomy is when you go and you take this place, don't think it's because that you are so much better than them. What did he say? They are extremely wicked. And in essence, so are you. But they are extremely wicked. So, really, I think, and this is a hard thing to say, and I don't want to say it insensitive, when you see that mass genocide, the reality is the wickedness of man, all of us deserve that. And it's only by the grace of God that that men and women and children don't get what they earn. I say earn because when we say deserve, we say, well, they can't deserve that. No, they earned it because of our wickedness. So when there's then the extension of that, the cities that are near you, there's still this annihilation of that. Why is there that annihilation of that, and why does it encompass then everybody? And I would go back to saying it's because of that wickedness, and that wickedness is not just the men. That wickedness is the totality of that culture and everything that it entails. And you have to realize that you're talking about the sacrificing of kids to pagan gods, which Israel bought into. And then you're talking about, and this is the hard thing for us to fully grasp too, that, okay, well, I can then see women, because women can partake of that. But then, those kids, they have it, and there's a sense in which you have to step back and say, yeah, it's imputed sin. In sin, David says, in sin, my mother. He didn't say bore. He said what? Conceived while still in the womb. God doesn't apologize when he talks about claiming Jacob and Esau before they're able to do anything, while they were in the womb. Sin is conceived at birth, not just birth, at conception. And so, I think it really shows the weight and the heaviness of sin. Then when you extend out, I think this is a little bit more about probably what my dad's saying. When you extend that out then to farther nations, you're still trying to weigh out and keep out the cultural practices that are anti-God. You're trying to do it as gracefully and mercifully as what you can. So with the men, you're taking out the men, but you're not taking out the women. You're not taking out the children. And there's a sense in which you're showing mercy in an area where you can show mercy. That maybe doesn't have the exact influence that a nation that's right next to you that does. I think the value, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think that the value and principle that carries over from that, sometimes Christians have been rightly criticized for being harder than what we have to be. We don't show mercy and grace very well. I know I'm going to step on some toes on this. I don't really even want to go there, but it's true. Being asked to wear a mask is not what a Christian probably should die on the sword on. And I know everybody in here probably is with me in relation to that. And the reason I say that is because there's going to be other battles that come up that are going to require us to take a stand, that are going to be much more important than this one is. And I think that regardless of how we feel like in relation to it's unnecessary and it's wrong and it's going to lead to other things, which all those things are probably true, they're not asking someone or even telling someone to do something that is anti-Bible in relation to that. And one of the things that a guy said to me once, and I think he nailed it dead on. I don't think he fully knew exactly what he was saying, but he said, the thing that the Christian has to guard against in this time is not maybe so much as, are we going to take a stand, but being hardened as we approach having to take a stand. And I think he's right on that. It's real easy to become hardened as you're seeking to take a stand in relation to that. And one of the things that you're seeing in this passage is it seems like as that's progressing, God is taking a hard stand in relation to, number one, the cities that they're inhabiting, and then the ones right next to them, because those are going to culturally influence them directly, and it's going to draw them away from God. But as that's extending out, He's extending more grace and mercy, not because they're less wicked, but because He has the availability to show more grace, if you will, or maybe more mercy and grace at that moment than He would otherwise. It's kind of like what we said, with the kid. If you there's times which you have to draw a hard line. I loved what a professor said. Try to say to your kids and your grandkids yes to everything that you can, because it's hard enough to keep rules and keep the no's that you give them. Say no? Yes, absolutely. But don't try and find reasons to say no. Right? And see, what he's talking about there is not a command or a law. What he's talking about there is a heart. Keep your lines. Keep your values. Keep your principles. Stay grounded in the Word. And it's kind of like what we talked about last week, but with the right heart and attitude as you're moving out from that. Because you're not just displaying a law or a command or a morality. You're displaying the character and nature of God. And see, what I want to do is, when I'm displaying as Christian, is I'm not just displaying a gospel, I'm displaying the character and nature of God. Does that carry with it attitude? And the answer I say is absolutely, in terms of an attitude. What's the attitude of God? I'm not talking about should we have bad attitudes? No, absolutely not. Why? Because that would misrepresent the attitude of God, right? And so you're seeing this as we even push forward in a big picture way in the covenant people of God as he's moving forward with pagan people, with pagan wicked people in relation to that. Love verse 19 and 20. When you besiege a city a long time to make war against it in order to capture it, you shall not destroy its trees by swinging an axe against them, for you may eat from them, and you shall not cut them down. For it is the tree of the field, for is the tree of the field a man that it should besiege you? So what's he saying? What's he say right there? Yeah, and it's interesting. Does God care about creation? That's interesting. God cares about creation. And he is saying, is that tree going to hurt you? In other words, can you have the same ought against that tree as what you do a man? And the answer is no. Why? Because that tree is not going to attack you like that man would. So he says, don't cut that tree down. And now notice which tree specifically he's talking about. Trees that bear fruit. The trees there are actually doing what? But yeah, providing, benefiting you. The creation of God that's there to benefit you. Right? So it's almost like don't take advantage of the trees as if they're going to attack you. You can't just go out and just maul down this place. Right? And oh, by the way, these specifically fruit trees bearing fruit that are going to give you sustenance. Okay, now let's keep the pendulum in the middle. Verse 20, only the trees which you know are not fruit trees you shall destroy and cut down, that you may construct siege works against the city that's making war with you until it falls. So trees are men and people and gods? No, that's not what he's saying either. They're there, God's given them as a provision, in this case now, to what? To accomplish, and catch this, not just to do what you want with your purpose, but to carry out the what? Which is what? The purpose of God, part of the covenant of God. It's still not free reign for you just to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. I put next to this in my notes just as an example. Why, when our kids are growing up, I did with ours. We didn't have it a whole lot, but I did with ours. Daddy, and he's running out the door with a BB gun. What are you doing, son? Gonna go shoot some birds. Wait a minute, son. Go find some targets. Do what? Don't go shoot the birds. I'm not trying. Some of you may be like, well, I didn't do that. I told him to go shoot them all. To kill a mockingbird. I thought that was supposed to be, like a funny story I can share with you too on that. No, a lot of times what we would always say to them is what? If you're going to kill it, you're going to eat it. In other words, we're not just going to randomly, recklessly go out and just start shooting everything that we see. Now, I had a friend, Junior Vandenberg. I don't even know if I told my dad and mom this story. I had a friend, Junior Vandenberg. He'd take me fishing and hunting all the time. He said, hey, calls me up one time. Let's go crow hunting. I said, crow hunting? Yeah. He gets out this record player and a big blooming thing. It's blaring it out off of a speaker or whatever and calling these crows in. He said, get ready because they're fixing to come in. And then he looks at me and says, technically this is illegal. He said, technically this is illegal. He said, they said if a crow was disturbing your property, then it would become legal to shoot it. And he says, I've never seen a crow that didn't want to destroy property. And if you know Junior Vandenberg, you knew that would be him. Junior. Yeah, Junior Vandenberg. Yeah, with dynamite or telephone lines. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. God cares about creation, right? But it's not creation out of order. In other words, creation is still there for God's glory, His purposes and His plans, just as you and I are. So it's a great chapter in just a lot of ways. At first reading, you read it and you're like, oh, it doesn't apply to us. But when you read through it and you start thinking about the principles that carry through with that, deep, deep truths of current that carry us, into today, no doubt. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for this day and just all that we just see and savor and just love. And Father, we just pray that we might be truly a covenant-driven, purpose-driven people for your plan and for your glory. And Father, rest in your promises as we move forward with that, standing firm with the right heart and the right attitude. These things we pray in your Son's holy name. Amen.